And whenever you're ready.
Hi, I'm Jules, and I'm here today to talk about the tendency of humans to create low resilience environments. First, I want to start with a quick definition of resilience. Many people tend to think of resilience like a spring. Despite external pressures, something will always return to its original state. However, that's a bad definition. That's a poor definition of resilience that fails to cover the concept of adaptation. A better example would be this bridge made out of Legos. Under external pressures or stresses, it may break apart. And if its external environment is still permanently changed, it can be arranged and put together in a different form to fulfill its same role in its environment. So let's take a look at some resilience when it comes to evolution. One of the most famous examples is peppered moths. During the Industrial Revolution in England, pollution from factories would cause environments to be covered in soot. And so these moths evolved to have much darker coloration so that they could have better camouflage and blend with predators, allowing them to adapt to the situation and survive and change because of it. Another strong example we can see is that of white clover. It has adapted to survive in urban environments and suburban environments where there's much different spread of pollen and such, and which is why you may have seen this type of flower much more commonly. So let's take a turn to resilience in humans. This is a necessary quality in humans to be able to change when a disaster strikes, such as in the 2010 Haitian earthquake. Survivors would turn to religion, would shift their standards of living, and would change their ways of coping with grief to be able to move on and to physically survive the situation. But even then, it changed those people. It still left them with mental trauma and things like that. It was still an altercation. It's not springing back into the exact same shape. Human resilience can be summed up fairly well by this quote by Maya Angelou. I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it. Resilience is in essence adaptation and the ability to survive when everything around you has changed. The problem comes with the fact that humans tend to deprioritize resilience in systems that they create and influence. An agricultural example of this would be the Gros Michel banana. Apologies. Before 1950, this banana would be the one that was marketed everywhere, essentially the only species of banana really available to consumers. However, because this was the only option, there was no diversity and no real flexibility in this market. When a fungus emerged that would infect and kill these trees, it caused a temporary collapse in that market because it had no resilience. While we do obviously have bananas today, they are the species known as Cavendish bananas, and because there has been no change to the system, they had a very similar scare in 2019. The same disease that killed Gros Michel bananas and caused their near extinction evolved to be able to infect Cavendish bananas, and because of this low resilience, it caused a state of national emergency in countries that heavily relied on these bananas as their exports. From a different lens, we can see we can look at the mental health pandemic, the mental health crisis that followed the COVID pandemic. As you can see on this chart, in 2020, after a few months after the pandemic started, there was a sharp spike in anxiety rates in the US population, which remained constant throughout 2021, despite other aspects of the US, such as the economy, recovering, because of a lack of mental health infrastructure and the stigmatization of mental health. There was low resilience in the American people, and they continue to struggle with mental health issues that were because of this change in environment. even after it has been resolved. Real quick, let's talk about evolutionary bottlenecking, which is often forced upon species in urban environments. When a species is reduced to a very small size, a very small population, it decreases genetic diversity. Then even once they are able to re-increase their population, they still lack that genetic diversity. This makes them less resilient moving forward because they're unable to, because when other external pressures change, they have fewer available traits that allow them to adapt and survive to any other pressures. So what are some potential solutions to this problem? Solution number one would be simply avoiding external stressors. This would minimize the cost. Pros of this would be minimizing the cost to change already existing systems because you would be focused primarily on external changes and external prevention rather than fundamentally making changes to systems and societies that are already in place. And it would still reduce the risk of having to respond to these external pressures where resilience is needed. However, it would have minimal effectiveness for anything that was able to slip through these external mitigation factors, and it wouldn't incorporate in any sort of effective management for crises that are already occurring because it wouldn't increase flexibility or diversity in the ways that systems are held up. This brings us to the second solution, which would be restructuring systems. Some pros of this are that systems can be built with greater flexibility and fail-safes, and this would provide more blanket coverage for safety and the ability to be resilient. And because of this more blanket coverage, it would have greater consistency than solution number one. However, the drawback to this is that it would take much more time, energy, and money to be able to implement these new systems and create significant changes to existing ones that have low resilience. And there's still not a guarantee of the success of these, which would often leave any system that still failed and still lacked resilience in a worse position than they would otherwise be because they invested so much on a failed measure. The ultimate solution combines the best aspects of these two. A long-term restructuring is still necessary, and we have seen that in things like the COVID pandemic, which introduced working from home, and has fundamentally changed the workplace so that there's more flexibility for many people who are many workers and who have access to technology now, or in terms of natural bridges, which allow connection of ecosystems, and this is necessary to allow greater flexibility long term. However, short-term avoidance will still allow for people to be safe in the short term as they are able to adapt and before the time is able to be spent on long-term restructuring. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So we have some questions for you. What information did you need that you were not able to find? How did you go about trying to find it?
I struggled to find some information on specific possibilities of how these long-term systemic changes would be put in place, because as I explained, it's against what humans tend to do, which is create less resilient structures. However, and so I looked for long-term resilience, and I tried to look into historical structures that have survived. But ultimately, one of the best things I found was, once again, the new work from home structure that is in many workplaces today because of the COVID pandemic and because it was a time where there was kind of a force to change after a collapse that had already happened.
Okay. And then lastly, if you had more time, what additional research would you conduct related to this issue?
I would probably look further into things like agricultural and economic systems that are unresilient. I think the example with the Gros Michel bananas was very interesting and very much could have led to significantly more disaster. And I'm sure out there is something that has had even higher costs that could be explored, that because of, once again, that low resilience.
Okay. Thank you very much.